every time I've been in foreign countries, when I tell a joke, I get the first little wave of English-speaking people who laugh, and then there's a time delay for everybody else to laugh. So when I say a joke, I hear, so it's like a wave. I have to wait a little bit. That's all right, we'll get into it. It's really a miracle that we've been able to gather here in view of all the opposition. There are forces out there that, if they had their power, would not allow us to meet. The oppressed have become the oppressors. A minority that claims that they want to be heard does not allow us to speak. A minority that talks about tolerance and diversity blocks people from seeking change. It's change in their sexual orientation. And the ministry that threatens that they are the victims of violence require us to have special protection, special security. Now, I understand that we were originally allowed to speak at a medical university, but then that invitation was withdrawn. And one of the reasons for the medical university to withdraw their invitation for this conference was their claiming that the American Psychological Association prohibits this kind of reparative therapy. In fact, in 2011, just very recently, a couple of months ago, the American Psychological Association made its statement about reparative therapy. And it's rather extensive, but basically it says, the American Psychological Association concludes that there is insufficient evidence to support the use of psychological intervention to change sexual orientation. Secondly, the American Psychological Association advises parents and guardians and young people and their families to avoid sexual orientation change efforts that portray homosexuality as a mental illness. Well, certainly we don't have to present homosexuality as a mental illness. The point is, if people want to change, they should have the right to do so. But how is it possible that the American Psychological Association can say that there is no evidence for change of sexual orientation through psychotherapy? Our organization, an organization that I am associated with, in fact I was one of the founders of this organization, is called the National Association for the Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, NARTH, and the website is narth.com, the National Association for the Research and Therapy of Homosexuality. We did a $10,000, when US dollars were valuable, $10,000 research project addressing the three arguments, the three claims made by the APA. First argument, the first claim that's made by the APA is, number one, people cannot change their sexual orientation as a result of psychotherapy. Number two, that therapeutic efforts to change someone's sexual orientation creates greater harm, greater self-hatred, greater suicide, greater depression. Number three, there is no greater pathology in the gay community compared to the heterosexual community. Now, pathology is defined as self-destructive, self-defeating, maladaptive behaviors. That is pathology. So APA is making these three claims. And yet we did a great review of the literature. And we find, if anybody is interested in this, it's readily available online. Unfortunately, it's in English, but it is available online, very available to you. We did a complete review of the literature. There are 20 pages here of very tight references of many, many studies, professional studies in professional journals, showing that change happens as a result of psychotherapy. That there is in fact no evidence that people are harmed through this kind of therapy, as any more than they would be harmed by any other kind of therapy. And as far as pathology goes, there's a great deal of psychological and medical pathology associated with homosexuality. Compared to heterosexuals, there is greater suicide among gays, more depression, more anxiety, drug and alcohol abuse, failed relationships, sexual promiscuity, anonymous sex, sadomasochistic behaviors, and many other, as we would say in polite company, exotic sexual practices that I won't even mention. Now, why did we bother to document all this kind of pathology? This is not gay bashing. This is not putting down gays. But these are psychological facts that people need to know. Because if you're a counselor, or if you're a pastor, or if you're a parent or a teacher, and a young person comes to you and says, I think I'm gay, you could say to them, look, if you go down this pathway, these are the kinds of difficulties you're going to encounter. And if you can avoid that in going in this direction, we have a responsibility to tell you. Young people are not being told the dangers that are associated with the gay lifestyle. The mental health profession has become so concerned about protecting one minority, namely the gays, that they're risking the health of another minority, namely young people. So how is it possible that the APA can say that there is no evidence for change when in our own research we see so much documentation? By the way, I'm just going to mention the Spitzer report. Has anybody heard of the Robert Spitzer report? Let me just tell you very briefly. He's a very interesting story. Robert Spitzer was the key architect of the 1973 decision to normalize homosexuality. In 1973, there was a big debate in the American Psychiatric Association, and it was Robert Spitzer who led the movement to remove the pathological label associated with homosexuality, to depathologize homosexuality. That was in '73. About 20 years later, Robert Spitzer is walking to the American Psychiatric Association convention, and he's seeing these people picketing outside. And they're saying, support our change, and we want you to support our change, and homosexuality is not right for us. And he thought these were gay people. He didn't understand who they were. He said, didn't we take care of your problem 20 years ago? They said, no, we're not gay, we are ex-gay. He said, well, what's ex-gay? Ex-gays are people who are gay, who have same-sex attractions, but we want to change, and we want the American Psychiatric Association to support us, and not to tell us that we just have to accept it, that we're born this way. So Robert Spitzer, who was a true liberal, when I say a liberal, which means to say he's truly open-minded, became curious about this population. Who are these people? And that night, he started to talk to them. They were picketing, and he was making a conversation with them. And they invited him over that night for a small group get-together. And he attended, and he listened to their story, and he became interested in this population. Who are these people? How successful are they in trying to change? That curiosity led him to do a study. And he was able to find 200 people that significantly changed. 152 males and 48 females. I believe that comes up to 200. These were individuals who had made not only diminishment of their homosexuality, but had a heterosexual adaptation. In other words, they had moved on to heterosexuality, in some cases marriage. And this was after 5-year follow-up. In other words, it wasn't just done after therapy, it was done at least 5 years after therapy. And this was very controversial. So now the hero of the gays, Robert Spitzer, now became the enemy. This is just one study of many studies documenting the reality of sexual orientation change. So the question becomes, how is it that the APA can say change does not happen when we see so much evidence that it does? Okay. 2 years ago, the American Psychological Association decided to solve this question and determine whether or not people can change. And they organized a task force, a small group of 6 psychologists. 6 psychologists. And these 6 psychologists were going to look at the literature, look at the evidence, and make a determination. Well, who did they choose? They chose 6 gay psychiatrists. Now, we submitted our names, some people on our side who believe change is possible. All of us were rejected. And what they accepted were lesbian and gays. And I'm not just talking about psychologists who happen to be homosexual. They also happen to be gay activists. So it's understandable that these individuals are going to be very dismissive of our literature. Now think about it. You have to understand the psychology of coming out of the closet. We've all heard the expression coming out of the closet, announcing to the world and accepting your gay identity. Now, these 6 people who were sitting in judgment of the literature, these 6 people who were sitting in judgment of the personal testimonies of men and women who said they changed, these were people who went through the coming out process, the coming out of the closet process. Now, what does that mean? When you look at what gays themselves say about coming out of the closet, it means the following. You're a young person, you discover you have these feelings, you have these attractions. Your first reaction is to dislike them, to be afraid of them, to be ashamed of these attractions, to want them to go away. You've been told that these feelings are sinful and weird and perverted, and you hope they go away. You try to deny it. You try to pray it away, if you will. But eventually you realize that you cannot, and that you have to come to accept that this is who you are. And here's the tricky part of the coming out process. Taking on the gay identity means you have to grieve the hope. You have to surrender the hope of ever believing you could be straight. You have to give it up. And you have to accept the gay identity. So something has to die for something new to be born. The hope of ever being heterosexual has to die to become a gay identified person. So now these are the individuals who sat in judgment of the literature. How could these individuals possibly believe that people can change when they didn't have hope that they could change themselves? It's like a religious person who once believed in God and now no longer believes in God. Is he going to believe the testimony of a religious person? Is he going to believe that this person actually experiences God when they know they haven't? This is the psychology of the gay identified person. Not only is reparative therapy meeting the basic standards, but we have gone above and beyond that. And NARTH has has written out practice guidelines for the treatment of unwanted same-sex attraction. And I don't know if this has been handed out.
Translated into Polish.
Okay, so I understand that you have the Polish translations of this somewhere. So this is the basic guidelines, and they are 11 of them. I'm not going to go over it, but just to let you know that we have standards of treatment above and beyond the standard treatments that have been established by the American Psychological Association. It's important to know that my latest book, which has been translated into Polish, which is out there, has been endorsed by 2 past presidents of the American Psychological Association. These were 2 men, Nicholas Cummings and Robert Perloff. These are 2 past presidents of the American Psychological Association who see how our profession is going into politics, how it's being swayed away from science to a political agenda. And both these men have endorsed my book very, very favorably. Robert Perloff said, and I'm going to quote him, "The individual has the right to choose whether he or she will accept a gay identity. It is his or her choice, not that of an ideologically driven interest group. To discourage a psychotherapist from undertaking a client's wish to convert as anti-research, anti-scholarship, and antithetical to the quest for truth." Nicholas Cummings, another past president, said, "I remain fiercely dedicated to the freedom of choice for all people, and especially in their right to choose the goal for their own individual psychotherapy." And of course, Robert Spitzer, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, said, "The patient should have the right to explore their heterosexual potential." As a result of his study, he said, "Contrary to conventional wisdom, some highly motivated individuals, using a variety of therapeutic efforts, have made substantial change in multiple indicators of sexual orientation." The very founder of psychotherapy, Sigmund Freud, in 1918 said, "We refuse most emphatically to turn a patient into our private property and to decide his fate for him, to force our own ideals upon him in the service of a particular philosophy. In my opinion, this is to use violence upon the patient."